Just send it back. Just send one of
That's funny.
Welcome to this special call meeting. Today is Thursday, May 26th. The hour is 9:02. And We have, call us to order, we have 6 items to discuss today. First 2 are resolutions that are operational in nature. Third is a staffing discussion. Fourth is a proposed budget discussion. 5 is a capital summary discussion, and 6 is a communities agency discussion. So back to the first item, resolution number 2022-05-25-01. This is a, with regard to the bid award for the Main Street streetscape, which will be between 2nd and 4th. Again, as a reminder to the public, between 2nd and 4th on Main Street. Mr. Martin, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Also, depending on how this conversation goes, we have some information about the fountain at Whizziger as well. We might present at the end of this discussion about the resolution. We opened bids on Tuesday. We received 1 bid in the amount of $6,125,000 for the Main Street Streetscape project. Engineer estimates during design hovered between 4.5 and 4.7 million in that range. So this is quite a bit higher than those estimates, but it did surprise us seeing some of the bids coming out of other places right now. You have the information in your packet. You have the bid. It's in the packet. Is that correct? Actually, everything in it.
It's on your iPad.
I thought everything was here.
I thought it was too.
Come on, Ashley.
Slacking tonight.
And you know, it's a big document. There's a lot to that bid. The kind of the important information in there. The winning bid, the only bid was from Pace Contracting. It's a good streetscape contractor, so we're satisfied with the contractor that bid. There's information in there about their experience. Erin can kind of answer questions. You worked with them on the Town Branch project in Lexington Vine Street. That's their project. They're just completing. And there's actually a breakdown in there of line items for the different components of the project. And the major costs were in the electrical. We were anticipating some higher costs on the concrete in the things with the concrete shortage right now. But those numbers are actually pretty reasonable. It was not electrical where a lot of the high costs were. One of the good things with 1 bid, if we decide to move forward with this contractor and award the contract, then we can start looking into those numbers and see if there's ways we can bring those down.
Josh, let's talk about that for like half a second. What is the scope of the project is replacing and upgrading your infrastructure from 4th to 2nd in terms of hardscape. With that, we know we have to replace the electrical system. And we have long had as a community, the objective of bringing the utilities along 4th Street around Whizziger Park down to Walnut. So the electrical work, so when he's talking about it being electrically sensitive in terms of cost, right, the electrical really influences the total project cost. It's because so much of the scope is directly tied to electrical work, whether it be traffic signals, street lights, pedestrian signals, outlets in the sidewalk, and buried utilities, right? So there is a significant amount of electrical work on the project, and that is proven to be a very volatile commodity right now in the market. And so yes, that is influencing your cost, and yes, but understand, I want to make sure the community understands the extent to which we're doing electrical work downtown. We want to upgrade all the electrical infrastructure along Main Street so that the pedestrian lighting is better, so that your street lighting is better. We have traffic signals to replace on 4th and 3rd and 2nd. Those are significant pieces of infrastructure. And then you're talking about burying the overhead utilities down 4th Street, which is also significant. So I just want to make sure we emphasize the driver of your expenses. The concrete is not necessarily the driver or the controlling work item, okay? Your electrical is. Just make sure we emphasize that.
Yeah, out of the, this in full transparency, this doesn't include we'll have to pay the utilities to come in and do their portion of the project. That's something the city contracts directly. So you're
And the
looking at
utility portion is pulling the wire in the conduits down 4th Street, so.
the poles down.
Right. One thing too, let me step in real quick on a side note. Our camera system's messed up. So we have, I apologize to both the public and the commission, but our switchboard in the back decided that it was done for a while. And so staff is working on that. IT has been on it this week, and they have this temporary camera set up for the community to at least observe the meeting. But we apologize, that's substandard. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, so, total project, with 6.1, $6,125,000 for the bid plus the utility components, you're looking at around $6.5 million. Out of that $6.5 million, probably 2.5 of that is electrical. Your concrete's $500,000. Your granite curbs are, I think they're $400,000 with a line item for that. The pavers are $600,000. So you can tell the big part of this project is the electrical component. Thinking as staff, what we would recommend in this situation, and think, our sidewalks on Main Street need to be fixed. Our electrical stuff on Main Street needs to be fixed. And I've been thinking a lot since we opened the bids, can we do better? Can we do this more cheaply, more affordably? And I would not take that bet at this point. I would think, we are at a point, we have a good contractor, we have a window of time, we're in deep conversations with KYTC to get some of their questions resolved. We've got, everything's lined up, ready to go. Concrete, there's a lot of questions around concrete in the future. Electrical components, could they come back down in the future? Maybe. But, if the commission so desires, and, we want to do this project now, I don't know if by waiting will present a better opportunity.
I don't think you will. The other side of that too is we had multiple contractors that considered bidding, that worked on bids, but ultimately decided that they couldn't meet the schedule. Pace is an experienced contractor with Streetscape downtown Lexington, and said they felt like they could meet the schedule. So the reason you end up with one bid is because you end up with the only person the only entity that turned in the bid is the one that said, we're willing to put the resources on the job, and so when we say that they have the capacity to meet the schedule, it doesn't necessarily mean that the schedule is impossible. What it means is they have the resources available to do the work, right? Some of the other contractors may already have other work and may not be able to staff up to meet the schedule, if that makes sense. Now, in terms of funding the project, we had talked about various strategies. I know at the last budget meeting we mentioned funding this out of reserves. So right now we are suggesting that you draw down the reserves the full amount of this contract. We have, part of the presentation is a cash position. It's early on in our budget process, or the budget sheets today. You'll see that we can take that step, and that's probably the most reasonable thing to do if it's your intention to actually do the streetscape, is fund it out of reserves and not incur debt tied to the project. And Lee, do you want to talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, I've looked at it along with Earl, and we have the capacity to pull it down from reserves without compromising any other positions. We have built it up over the last several years, so I think you're in a really good spot that you would not need to take on additional debt, and I would not suggest it, since we can afford it otherwise.
What's our present reserve?
I've got to print some slides that will show you that in detail.
Are we bound by law to have a 20% reserve?
Well, I needed that slide really up for this, but I don't have it. Can you go to my presentation, Jason?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You have that clear. So that slide is at the bottom is your cash position.
Everybody can read that, can't they?
Yeah.
I'm all over.
What does that say?
So Well, I thought that would show better. So the bottom line is this, in your, let me read the numbers from my screen so I can know that,
Is this on our laptops?
did you,
It's
did I?
part of what you sent me. That you were doing.
I will make, you will have this on your laptops. I can't remember.
Actually, I don't have a link on my thing to get to the document. Sorry. Technology's great.
I do not either.
It's okay.
Should we be having this?
So what's on the bottom of that slide, the total eligible cash that the city has right now for, that's general fund related, is 29,514,000. That is the number down here.
In the gray?
Yeah, down here at the very bottom. Okay.
29 what?
29,514. The 25% fund balance target, it's actually 25%, is 5 million. That's represented in this second line right there, which is a $5 million number. Then the unrestricted amount is 24,464. Your annual operating expenses is over here, which is 20,200,000 proposed. And so what we suggest is you can pull then this number down 6 million and be about 18 or 19 compared to full operating budget. So you're still right there, your stated goal of having that full year in reserve that we talked about before COVID. Now, keep in mind, this number increased a lot because of the conservative nature we've had over the last 2 years. And remember, one of the budget meetings I talked about where we've added about $3 million over the last 2 years because of that. We underestimated our reserves. We were very conservative. Staff was very conservative, not anything to do with me. Staff, your department heads, your police chiefs, fire chiefs, utility staff were very conservative, and ultimately we all went forward not knowing what impact we would have. Now we're starting to see that impact a little bit with inflation. Today, though, given that we've saved that money over the last couple of years, we would advocate that you invest that money in streetscape rather than incur debt in the short term. Bottom line. And so I thought I had included this PDF in my haste this morning. I probably didn't. I apologize for that, but that will be in your slides. You'll have this, and we'll talk about this more at length during the budget. But the bottom line is these numbers are why we say that we can fund the streetscape out of reserves and still consider ourselves secure, financially secure. The other side is with this little line, these lines over here, which I know you can't see, is the bottom line is your total cash position, given that you've spent money on the fire station, you've spent money on Pearable Road, and you've spent money on the wastewater plant. Even with that, those expenditures over the last year, our cash position has increased by $312,000. Okay, so what we are suggesting to you is investing instead of debt servicing. If it's your goal to do the streetscape, let's get it done. And take the opportunity that we have created over the last couple of years by being conservative to do that.
So this does not include the final pulling of the wire by KU. Do we know what that cost is?
Top of your head, I mean, find it.
It will be somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000.
Yeah,
Knowing that.
it's four something. I'll find an exact number, but it's
Okay.
400,000. That's what, we kind of expressed in the past, the cost of various of those utilities on 4th Street would be about $1 million. It's probably $1.5 million now, looking at the numbers that we got, so.
Mr. Mayor, you ready for a motion?
Yes, sir, anytime.
I'd like to move to approve resolution 2022-05-2501 as presented by staff.
We have a motion, is there a second?
Second?
And a second. We're in discussion. Further.
My only question is, I'm thinking about it, what are our alternatives? We don't have any.
Well, there's no way to,
Our sidewalks bad, our electricity's bad, which is dangerous, we've known that for a while, so
Both are dangerous.
I don't know what. yeah.
so there's some problems in Main Street that we're aware of. One, our sidewalks have degraded to the point where they are a hazard, we believe. We know that the ginkgo trees downtown are a problem, right? We freely acknowledge, while some folks find them attractive at different times of the year, they're beautiful and they're yellow, but they are a problem.
Some
We
people like
acknowledge
the smell,
that
they
problem.
don't. I mean,
We look for ways to deal with those problems, and this does fix those problems. This takes, it will replace those trees with a different variety with new trees. Now, that's gonna be pretty impactful, but it also deals with a negative electrical system that is a significant risk and problem. So, as it relates to aesthetics downtown, as it relates to pedestrian safety downtown, usability of your downtown, the functionality of your downtown, in terms of what the city can influence on Main Street, this is all of those, truthfully. And I know we just had a restaurant open, or is opening on Main Street, and that we know things like this enable that environment. So we certainly would understand why you would want to go ahead and proceed.
So let's just talk about those trees, because I know that's gonna become a huge topic as we keep forward into it. And no matter what we say today, it'll be forgotten, but, what is the anticipated replacement there?
We have a list of tree species, a couple of oak trees, there was a,
Okay, let me stop you right there. The problem is with the ginkgos, we let them grow too long. How are we going to remedy that going forward? Doesn't make much sense to me to put in all this underground structure and new concrete, just to put in whatever tree we put in and let it grow well past its useful stage as far as downtown confinement is concerned.
Aaron, can you address that?
Yeah, sure. I think the trees that we've selected, one, their roots aren't gonna displace the sidewalk the way the ginkgos do today. Though the ginkgo species has a tendency to kind of uproot, per se, and destruct sidewalks. So the species we've selected notoriously don't do that. I think the other thing is long-term maintenance of trees is something that the city has to consider, right? That when you plant a tree, you don't just forget about it and leave.
Thank you, you made a point.
yeah, and also, you know, one of the benefits of doing papers in the tree areas is that, you know, and we have specially designed tree cells that hold the root system for these trees. If we have a tree that goes bad, if we have a tree that we wanna replace them at a certain point, pull the papers up, pull the tree cell out, pull the tree out of the tree cell, plant a new one in there, put the papers back, and it's like new. So we've set the future of folks up there to deal with these problems. We've set them up well, to deal with it, so.
And the paver is not what you were talking about up there now. You were talking about an intended paver for that environment, for that purpose, on appropriately installed, not just a regular brick that's been, or something we've converted to a flat application and tried to grout in to make it function. We are talking about actual design pavers that are intended to be used in that environment.
And I got to one, this is important to me because we have dealt with this problem as downtown property owners and quote-unquote activists for downtown. We've dealt with this for 40 years. So it's time to get it right. It's time to set it up right. It's time to say we're gonna have a tree maintenance program. It's time to say that we're not gonna let these trees uproot sidewalks going forward. We're not gonna let these trees get into the electrical components and create that problem. Let's just set this up correctly now.
Like to call for the question?
Question's been called. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
Josh, the meeting still on for tomorrow?
With the downtown businesses,
Yes, sir.
Heart of Animals, that's actually this afternoon at
What
5:15
5:15?
at CenterWorks. Heart of Animals hosting a meeting for us to talk to downtown businesses about the project. That'll be today at 5:15, and we're also gonna kind of kick off our parking project with CenterWorks at that as well.
So, like, executive privilege, please. Aaron, do we still have a schematic of the alignments on Main Street?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
As far as the alignments and striping, parking places, all that kind of thing?
Yeah, yes, we have plans for that. We don't have visuals for that today per se, but we do have final
I
plans.
can get you all, I'll send you all, I'll pull it out of the big plan set and send it to you.
Okay. Please do.
Now,
I think that's important too.
now, one of the other things that's a loose end is the fountain on the corner tied to the streetscape. And since we are doing the streetscape project now, what we want to do is go ahead and take the small bow out that's on the corner. If you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. So we've been looking at that fountain out there with Josh and his team and thinking about how we can upgrade it. What we've heard is that, you know, it's small in nature, it doesn't have the sort of monumental effect of what the city would like to see in that corner. So in thinking about that, we're thinking about both replacing the fountain itself and improving a little bit of the landscape around the fountain. You know, today, you can walk through and see the fountain, but there's nowhere to sit. You can't really stay in that space. It's just kind of there to look at and walk past. So the plan that's up on the screen, you see 4th Street and Main Street, so we're at that corner. We're not changing the location of the fountain, so where the circles are, that's where the fountain is today. But we're talking about retrofitting sort of the basin that fountain sits in. You know, the brick wall with the limestone cap that's out there with the etched letters that talk about the park. So we're talking about just retrofitting that piece of infrastructure, pulling out the landscape bed and pouring in concrete, finishing it with a pool and fountain surface that's waterproof, putting in a new fountain that's larger in scale, has a lot more water and kind of presence in that corner, and also kind of pulling the streetscape materials that we're proposing into that space, getting rid of, there's like a landscape corner on the end, right where the two sidewalks meet, opening that up so that way it feels like that fountain is part of that corner. It's anchored with the street. You can kind of move into that space a lot more freely. And we've also looked at adding, you see there's 3 kind of bands around the circle. Those would be seat walls that reflect the same character of the materials of that round limestone and brick wall. So it's a place that feels more ingrained in the streetscape, a place where you can come and sit, have lunch with your coworkers or your children, and it has a larger presence with that corner in a monumental sense. On the right side, there's a couple, like I said, we're in process right now. There's a couple of different seating scenarios that we're exploring and a couple of different paving options that we're exploring. But that's sort of the basis of the direction we're going. I have a couple more slides that look at the fountain itself. So we did a little bit of a 3D study to just understand what scale we needed in the existing basin that's there. So the fountain that we pulled from a provider is about just over 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide in the sort of lowest basin, so there's 3 tiers. The lowest tier is 6 feet wide. And we're just reusing the size of that existing kind of wall that you have out there now, but instead of landscaping, it would be a pool of water that the fountain would cascade down into. We're still studying kind of how we want the pump and the utility mechanisms to serve the fountain. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. There can either be an autofill kind of moment at the rim of that basin with an underground vault that pumps that up, where you basically, it gets filled up once at the beginning of the season, gets auto-filled automatically, and it just runs. The maintenance there would be cleaning out like a screen and adding in more chemicals for the water. Very hands-off, But that's kind of the full Big Bang work there. The other option is to kind of do what we have today, where there's a pump set down in the basin of that water that just recirculates within that small system. Somebody, of course, would have to go out with a hose and fill up that basin on a regularly, once a week, maybe even more in the hot summer days. That is what you do now. So we're just kind of talking through those options and what that means. It does have, a financial increase to do something that's a more underground system that with hands-off. I'll show
You
you.
know how much, Aaron? I mean, what's the difference in cost would be?
Yeah, I have a slide on costs
Of course you do.
coming up. Yeah. I do have though. Here's some images of this fountain, which I find are pretty. I feel like this is the right scale for this corner. I particularly love the nighttime shot up in the upper right corner. You can put lights in the basin and on the tiers, and it has this elegance, this classical nature that I think fits well in Danville.
So along those lines, I really, really would like to see lights go in there for that very reason.
Yes.
A fountain is more impactful at night
Yeah.
than it is during the day.
So, well, these are kind of small to go along with the theme of today. But the option one is the fountain. Gosh, I can't even see it from here. Sorry. Option one is the fountain with the vault system in it, and you're about $189,000. And the option two without the vault system is $159,000. So you're losing about $30,000 for the vault system. The fountain itself is about $28,000. Repairing and remodeling the basin, retrofitting that system that you have out there today is about 40 grand. The landscape, the hardscape around it to create that new space is about 50,000 as well. So, I wanted to show this today because if we're shooting big, if we want to make an impact, this is what the cost would be. Now we can work with Josh and come up with, okay, how do we scale this back, right? We could remove those seat walls with the bricks and the limestone, and those could be off-the-shelf benches, right? We could do things to kind of scale this cost back, but if we're shooting for the moon and you really want to make an improvement, this is the cost that it'll take to get there.
So if I understand you correctly, whichever price, the only difference in those two prices is some of the internals.
That's right.
But the price includes the seating, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, it includes all the
I
improvements.
personally think it'd be foolish to scale that back at all. I mean, that's what your citizens want, that's what your citizens need, that's what your citizens are gonna use. So to scale that back is just margins. Margins.
And this is being proposed now because that area is gonna be torn up, so if we're gonna do it, now it's the time to do it.
So yeah, this is not trying to add bells and whistles to Visitor Park. This is fundamentally changing that corner, incorporating it into the streetscape plan with intent. It's in bringing the streetscape into that space, making that really a pocket park within the park. It is changing that corner. So when you're talking about scaling back, you're pulling back away from that. So it is an expense, but it is fundamentally different than what is there now.
It's the most visible money you'll spend right there.
I tend to agree with that. That is one of your most important corners in Danville. The bowl was a good effort. We readily admit that it didn't really reflect what was on the original schematic. We acknowledge that.
I'm kinda gonna miss that water pistol.
And there's a lot of staff that are excited if you all would concede to this investment, which is what it is, to the mayor's point. You're doing economic investment when you're doing things like this. So let's talk about the vision a little bit. So Center College is doing some on-campus artwork. They're paying homage to Stephen Powell. What we're talking about is a memorial plaza in front of the fire station. What we would like to continue to develop is a corridor from Center through Walnut to Constitution Square, where we have artwork, we have the Governor's Circle there. We need to enhance that and probably renovate that space so that it is equally an equal attraction to everywhere else here in town. There's no reason why it shouldn't. The bronze statue there is significant. So what we'd like to do is assemble some sort of pedestrian walking circle where we see things along that path that our parks like, or parks or artwork. And so this fountain would add to that and would be a piece of that. And so we, at the end of the day, it's probably a good economic investment, believe it or not, and that's how I would categorize it. And acknowledging that fountain probably, as originally designed, really didn't do that. It really wasn't intended to do that. It was, as I remember Mark Orman being here saying, well, we just want that to be a quiet space where you walk up to the flags and, see from the road. It was never really intended to be, but we want it to be more intentional than that, and I think Aaron's came up with a design that does that.
Two questions. Does the price include the illumination part?
Yes, it has the lighting in there.
Second question, what is the material of the apparatus itself?
The fountain is a sand cast iron.
Okay.
So will this act as a sort of an entrance into that park? Because there's really not anything that says, oh, this is a park,
So
let's go in.
we talk a lot about that, about how to connect. So when you stand up there now, that's one of the reasons we like working on this part of it is that fountain, that little circle, doesn't feel like it's part of Whitaker Park, it feels like it's part of the streetscape. So it made a whole lot of sense for us to just drag the streetscape into it and make it part of this project. But I do think there's a component of, okay, how do we get people, I remember back in Bourbon Chase last fall, and we had the exchange point in Whitaker Park. Nobody really migrated to the fountain area, because it's kind of its own little standalone spot. And so, yes, it will, I feel like it will draw people into that fountain area. And then you saw we've kind of tossed around some ideas of how do we get people from the fountain space into Whitaker Park. We had some paper drawings of things we could do to kind of pull the two together. I don't know, I don't think it'll feel like an entrance into Whitaker. I think that the next space will still feel that way as you move along Main Street. But it'll feel like somewhere if you're walking down the sidewalk, okay, it's set in this space, it's part of the street. I don't know.
So yeah, and when Whitaker was done, the inevitability of the streetscape, we acknowledged that. And so the integration of Whitaker into your environment around it wasn't really fully done, right? We knew that the streetscape, the overhead utilities on 4th, there would be a day where those would need to be addressed. We knew Main Street would need to be addressed. So now is the opportunity to kind of make our environment blend into that park and make that park then encroach into our environment to influence the ambience of your environment around it, right? And where right now we look at the park like it just sits up there, but now we want the park to feel like that space, right? And this is one of the pieces to this. So we don't want a decision on this right now. What we want to do is we'll bring this back to the next commission meeting and let you contemplate this concept a little bit so that we can move on today. And unless you all just want to direct staff to proceed with incorporating this into our project, which we can do, but we're not necessarily asking you to have to do that.
I'm gonna make a motion to proceed.
Second?
Discussion?
Well, I was gonna ask you a question, but I think Earl's already answered it. This 6.5, I was hoping that this fountain upgrade was gonna be included in that price, but I think you've already answered it.
It's not.
I'll chime in and say, this was our engineer's estimate, so it's very likely we could get a cost, from our contractor and see, it may be lower, they may be able to provide a better, Pace does self-performance on concrete, which I think is why the concrete number was pretty good in our bid package. So, we could ask for a price from them and see where it falls.
Which that's what it would become, is a change order in the job anyway. We would direct purchase the fountain itself. I think the fountain is what, 18,000 plus or minus? And so we will have the documents necessary to execute that if that's your all's direction today.
I guess I need to, specify which option to proceed with.
Let's come back to you with, you don't have to specify that today, let's bring you back more information on that.
Because it's really an operational thing, we can kind of come up with a plan, Earl and I talked about it a little bit, but we have more to discuss on that, to come up with what we think is probably the best.
I may have missed it, but, pardon me if I did. So, we're gonna start right after the Brass Band Festival for the public's benefit. What would be the completion estimated time?
We have stated in the contract that they need to have the hardscapes on Main Street done October 15th. That doesn't include, so they would spend 2 months on the south side of Main Street and 2 months on the north side of Main Street, so they have 4 months to complete that. The hardscape, that doesn't include lighting, trees, furniture, those kind of things.
And so, street traffic itself, will there be a closure? And how is that going to operate for the public's benefit?
The only time we anticipate any lane closures would be during the replacement of the median, which would probably happen January, February of 2023. Because we'd get the hardscapes done, sidewalks done, and then kind of put that area on pause through the holidays. And then we'd pick up with the medians January, February of 2023. And we are in full transparency, we are in discussions with KYTC whether the median work is actually gonna occur or not. We have to that's the one kind of thing that's up in the air.
I was gonna say, we need to make sure everybody understands what those are and what they would look like and visualize that. Because this community's gotten very fond of a very wide Main Street. And you're about to change that look.
Just temporarily, but, that's what the purpose of the meeting is tonight, correct?
Yes, that's part of the discussion with the Heart of Ample, is to talk about how things will change. This will be the third or fourth
But
meeting.
those medians aren't going to be temporary.
But the meetings will be flush, so they'll be, they'll function just as they function now, they'll just be decorative. The meetings will.
Yeah, you're not building a curved island in the middle of Main Street, that's not what we would ever, we're not saying that.
Guess I better come to the next meeting.
Well, we have a motion out here on the floor, so do I need to,
Well, we're in discussion, we're in discussion.
my motion, I will specify it by saying, it is to proceed with option one.
What does that mean?
Means that
The plumbing.
I can't read it.
the illumination and,
The full project.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm afraid that, you can save 5 cents in a length of pipe or whatever, and then you get finished and you think, man, I wish I'd have done
Too late.
the other.
Too
And
late.
then, you're kind of stuck, but I think the statement we want to make there, I agree, I'm fine with the better, lower maintenance options.
Chair's gonna call the question, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Dave,
I always wanted to ask a question.
was that yes or
Go
no?
ahead.
No, my question, if you call it, well,
You already talked.
you already called for the question.
I can retract the question.
Would you retract the
I
question?
will retract the question.
My question is about the motion. The motion is to give staff permission to proceed with the investigation or proceed with finishing the project.
What we will proceed with finalizing the documents necessary to incorporate the work. You all will ultimately have to approve that. If you all can still say no, we will invest time in dialing this into an actual executable document.
Okay, I can say yes because, you just got this handed to us right now. Okay, all right. We'll get another chance there.
Calling the question, sir?
No, I'm not calling the question. You call the question, right?
I'm giving you the opportunity.
I'm not calling the question.
Not call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Carried.
It's a whole lot of money.
Item 2 is resolution number 2022-05-25-02. This is the fire alarm monitoring agreement. Mr. Morgan.
Yes, this one's much easier. Just needed to get this executed so we can get our temporary certificate of occupancy on the fire station next door. we have to have a fire system monitoring agreement in place to get those. So this would be an agreement with our usual provider, Centos, for $540 for the year.
I move. Approve resolution 2022-05-25-02 as presented.
Second.
Any other discussion? If not, call for the question. All those in favor of this resolution say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you all. Now, if you all, so this next step is a full change of the discussion and direction. Do y'all want to take 5 minutes before we get into that? Or not? With the mayor getting
Yeah,
up
we'll
is the
do it,
reason I
we'll do
said
it now,
that.
then maybe we can push third, right?
Yeah, we can go a long way after this.
5 minutes.
Good morning. I was gonna watch her reaction. She sent me a very small. Didn't say.
What's that?
You're cool.
Not much. That's it. You said easy.
You do it.
Got that?
Behave yourself so far.
Which are? Which front?
Oh, yeah, it was up there on that, it was on.
I think Rick's likes it.
So, Mr. Congress, we'll call the teledoc. Let's know. So what kind of?
Like I do that kind of thing. It's 300 years.
We can agree for here.
That story.
No.
There was that name was up there. I mean, I think we did
It would
something,
take me 2 hours.
it was something. like-
Stuff like that.
Yeah, right, because they're going into budget now.
That's the stuff right there. We don't need it.
I would hope.
Yes. Exactly.
As usual, 5 is turned to 10, so we will move right on.
Okay, so we were just gonna briefly talk about our, local industry, occupational, data. You guys had a few questions a couple weeks back when we discussed revenue. So we just thought we would bring you guys a little bit of information.
This is populated into your OneDrive, by the way. This is,
Into what?
yeah, and on the computer, this is on there now, just so you know. Go ahead.
So this first slide, the bigger chart, it's, so all this information, is brought to you by the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development. Most of this data is specific to Boyle County, which includes Danville. A lot of the, bigger picture data does not break out Danville by itself. The only thing that is Danville alone is this top square. I know it's hard to read on the slide. This top square is our 10 largest taxpayers for 2021. And we're talking about occupational license taxes. So your top 10 taxpayers for tax year 2021 were Ephraim McDowell, Center College, Dana Sealing, Intelligrated Systems, the Kentucky State Department, the Kentucky State as a whole, the Danville Board of Education, Walmart, Client, Meggitt, and LSC Communications. And those are in order of highest to lowest tax paid for 2021. Obviously, Ephraim was by far the largest. And the remaining 9 were fairly close together. Center was a little bit, had a little bit higher tax dollars than, kind of than the rest. But the rest were all fairly neck and neck, so I would think within a few years they could rearrange themselves.
I would think more county schools would be.
Yeah, this was just from data. I got this information from the tax administrator of Boyle County. So she sent me a report. This was for Danville only. This wasn't the whole county.
Right, but
Well,
not in the city.
That was the information they provided to me. I can ask them
I
about
think
Boyle
that's
County
a good question.
specifically. But that was the top 10 for tax year 2021. And maybe they're just not quite in the top 10.
Well, this is state
Not really.
only, if this is state only though, you got 2 schools that are not in the city limits that are more Junction.
Okay, still, you got 2 big schools in the city.
Yes, and they may have just fallen at number 12 or number 11. I'd have to see a full list. She just provided me top 10 because their reporting is, it's on the back end, it's out of their system, it comes in via a notepad, if you know what that is. A notepad, that's like from early 90s, it's not. a
Hey, if
PDF.
you just check into it and
I'll
let
check
us
into
know.
it, absolutely. I'll ask where they fall. The bigger chart is, like I said, it's from the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development. So this breaks your number of businesses in the Boyle County and Danville area by type. So obviously, the highest category is health and medical services. This particular data does break out hospitals separately. Secondary is your quote-unquote memberships and organizations, which are your religious organizations, civic organizations, professional organizations. They lump those together. Then restaurants, real estate, specialty stores, banks. And then once you get down beyond the first couple, they're all fairly evenly spread out. So this secondary slide is just your number of employees by business type. So these are the actual number of employees that these entities are, that they have. Hospitals are obviously the biggest primary and secondary schools are your second biggest category, but it jumps from, 26 to 13%. So your hospitals, your medical organizations, those are your primary drivers. General merchandise store is third, communications fourth, and then this one again breaks health and medical services apart. So your hospitals are your biggest employer. This slide just represents your number of businesses, so the quantity of businesses within the county and the city versus the number of employees that they have. Health and medical services, again, are your big two, and hospitals, which are that first column, and then the larger column by far by number of employees. Restaurants are probably your third largest, while they're not the largest number of businesses, they do employ a large number of people. Banks and financial institutions, they also employ a large number of people. So these, the cabinet, the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development, they organize groups of industries. So your major SIC is your industry categorization for them. So this is your total employees essentially by your industry. Your biggest are manufacturing for our area, transportation and communication, retail trade is your biggest by far. And those are just kind of, we can go back and talk about any of those particular items if you guys are interested.
We just wanted to provide this to you. We had talked about this at one time, and we felt like we could, in a couple minutes, just explain really how the community is broken out from an industrial segment.
Where does the city and county as employers fit in here?
Those would probably, so on the cabinet side, they don't break it out by governmental organization. My best estimate would be under memberships in organizations. So, like for instance on this one, probably lumped in that second category. But their data on the economic development website does not specify.
You said this is on our iPad?
I uploaded it to OneDrive. It may not have loaded yet, but it will be.
Well, you have to send us the link, that's the only way we can get to it.
It's in the meeting packet.
I don't see it.
Folder. It should be listed as today's date as presentation is the file. But we'll make sure it is. We'll verify that it is.
Maybe it's me, but the only way I can get to that OneDrive
Yeah.
is if the little link is in an email and then click on that. Otherwise, I can't get to current documents.
We'll let IT help
Maybe
with
it's just
that.
me doing it.
And if you are interested in more information, I can get more information for you, but I would also say the economic development website that Kentucky has is very interesting. They had stratified their data in a lot of other ways that essentially you can filter down to Kentucky as a whole, the county, the region. It just has it doesn't unfortunately for us break it out by Danville versus Boyle County, but it was just a very interesting website.
Okay, what else?
All right, next. We're getting into staffing. We talked about last time, this slide, we went over it. Here is what we discussed with you that we would recommend priorities that we felt like that we would incorporate in the budget. If you all want to do more or less, you direct us to do that, it's fine. We are incorporating the reclassifications that we had previously discussed at different times along the way. for example, the city clerk grade adjustment, that will be confirmed in the budget process. Then, the list of staff workforce considerations that, came from department heads, we are adding, so the budget version you have today, we have added the community liaison funded, we added 1 police officer, we added, adjusted communications, we'll let Randy talk about that, we added 1 admin assistant to engineering, and added a maintenance worker into, Parks and Rec. The fire requested three firefighters or, 1 training officer. We settled on 2 firefighters, thinking that it would, in terms of training, we could only get 2 trained in the calendar, in the fiscal year that we're going into. So to add 3, you really couldn't get 3 training, during that cycle. So we're adding 2, and then we'll take up the discussion next spring for, going forward on how to get to there. So then, those are represent the personnel changes that is in this version of your budget. So the reason why we say, Mayor, that it was scattered about is because engineering is in 1 place, Parks and Rec is in 1 place. So these changes are incorporated not just in 1 location in the sheets that you have, but in several different locations.
So is this in our,
This is in the budget sheets that aren't printed on your table.
okay, thanks.
Yeah. And so the math on these, this PDF will be on your OneDrive. We have tried to add that now. The summary, the math of these 2 slides is represented in that slide that she provided you a copy of there a minute ago. So the bottom line is adding those positions. Remember last budget meeting, our baseline compensation step 2 added added $476,000 to the budget. And so when we say we add a police officer, we add a firefighter, when we add those expenses, this is your new budget impact on personnel for the year. This is your budget variance from last year in terms of personnel investment. So the number goes from 16 up to 18,129, 16,829 up to 18,129. Here is the changes that are being incorporated into the proposed budget. Incorporate the reclassification. We're adding a community liaison. We're adding an engineering admin assistant. We're adding a Parks and Rec maintenance worker. We're adding 1 certified police officer to the system, and we're adding 2 firefighters to the system. And then Josh, so communicate, or let's say Randy, communications made a request too for an employee. When we looked at that, we still have 2 vacancies there now, which tells us, when Randy and I talk, our market study probably for those positions to still be vacant after a year, that means that they're probably still under market. So then when we talk about that philosophically, the market for 911 is probably, when we look outwardly, has probably been a little bit arbitrary, meaning it's just at grade levels where it's been consistent with how does it fit into your community, it really doesn't look at what's it take to get a 911 telecommunicator with certain credentials. What does that really take? What characteristics of that position do you really want in the market? And so we believe that ours is even with the market study, which means the market study undervalues those positions, right? In my opinion, even with adjustments to the market study, we still have 2 vacancies and we can't fill them. We struggle to fill them. So what our approach to communications is to not necessarily add a position in the budget, take that money and invest it in raising the minimum for that department. So what we did was we did an arbitrary adjustment, we'll let Randy talk about that a little bit, to communications across the board and try to up that minimum level to try to populate and try to get applicants into that department. Okay, Randy, you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, dude, thanks, Earl. So as we looked at, and we talked a little bit about this on our last meeting, that, we're in the year 2 phase, and then next year we're gonna talk about doing a market study again, how it's going to compare in year 3 as opposed to the market. So Chief Gray and Rebecca and I, we've had a lot of conversations about dispatch, and so what we did is I'd asked Rebecca to go talk to some of her peers and some other departments and pull starting pay rates for 911 centers that were equivalent to us. And what we found is there's still a pretty big gap there. And when I say gap, I mean $3 to $4 an hour starting. And when we say starting, we're talking about someone with no experience, a recruit essentially. Dispatch, I know we talk about recruits and fire and police, but when you look at dispatch, it's essentially the same thing, right? And so and I talked to Earl about this too, we've had really strong success in recruiting and filling positions in other industries, but 911 is the one area that the market has simply outpaced our study. I mean, that's about the simplest way I can put it. And so when we went back and we looked at that, and our goal was to get that minimum base to $15 an hour. And so by doing that, you have to adjust your grades. And the other part of that is we want to maintain the consistency and methodology of our comp plan, make sure that we continue to pay equity that we talked about. I think that was one of the concerns we brought up at the last meeting, and we don't want to deviate from that. And so the way you do that is you set your objective of getting that $15 minimum for a recruit, but you've got to look at your total band and adjust those bands from minimum to maximum. Now, when you do that, you've also got to apply that methodology of adjustment to everybody in the department. So long story short, is that total cost, and when I say total cost, and there's really five components when we look at raising salaries. You've got your base salary. If it's a non-exempt position, you've got overtime that you have to consider. Your FICA, which is your Social Security, Medicare, employer pay taxes, retirement, and health insurance. So when you lump all those in together, essentially, on this scale, $60,000 of that would go to 911 and those adjustments. And to hire a new dispatcher, it would be in the range, depending on where their salary falls on experience scales, anywhere from $66,000 to $76,000. So to Earl's point, you essentially reallocate what we said we were going to add in one position, and then reallocate that to the existing staff, and also to recruit those two positions. Because the reality is we've got two openings. We've had a difficult time filling those positions. It doesn't make a lot of sense to have a third. It also taxes the department to try to train 3 people and send them through the academy in 1 year. Realistically, you're really maxed out at having about 2 trainees in 1 year. So we really wouldn't be able to fill 3 positions this year. So if we're not filling the 2 we've got, it's not a logical step to add a third position.
So essentially, we're gonna do what we did with the police department,
Yeah.
and hopefully, we raise the pay scale. We can recruit certified dispatchers, kind of like we have the police, because they can also plug in their experience into our pay scale, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay.
And that is what we're doing, and that is where we have been extremely successful on the police and fire side, is hiring laterals. The challenge with dispatch, though, is there's just not a lot of individuals going into that field. So your job market is limited, which is a really, and we've got to do a better job of marketing that as an industry career, as a city, promoting. Because it is a fantastic career. You've got, you get in, you get certified, you've got really good lifelong career there. So anyway, also short, this can help us get recruits, but yes, as it also help us with those laterals. The other thing we're looking at too is we're looking at some ancillary benefits, kind of that will be bringing to the table probably in June, with 911, that'll be more closer in line to the police. Okay. And so we think that'll help with recruitment and retention as well. So it's going to be a total package that we're looking at.
Comp studies are great for a baseline. Then you got market forces, supply and demand.
Yeah, it's pretty indicative when you've got 2 vacant positions that you're just not filling, that the market study hasn't really addressed those for you. So at the end of the day, in summary, we are asking you to add 6 positions to the city's operating budget. That we try to align those positions with directly influencing service to the community. For example, 2 firefighters, for example, a police officer, maintenance worker, And so and the community liaison position is in there too. So we do think that we are improving service by your investment in those staff.
Good, can I ask that, by our next meeting, which is a week from Monday, we have a written definition of the job duties of the community liaison?
I provided that at the last meeting when we talked about adding it, but I needed to make sure you have it again. In
Is it
advance.
written or just?
It was a written job
Yes.
description,
Yeah,
yeah,
we have it drafted.
It was in our packet.
a while back, like,
Under the city manager report.
yeah. So we'll make sure, don't worry about it, we'll make sure you get it again. Randy, what we mentioned is that I had provided a draft, and we had talked about Randy formatting it to our system. He's done that now, so we can rescind what that looks like. And should, so we felt good about the numbers, we felt good about being able to improve service to the community with where we're at now. Keep in mind, our beginning point is a conservative beginning point. And so as we are growing out of the COVID era, we'll say that, we want to align our resources specifically and very strategically to manage improved services over time. So it's really given us a chance to go back to a neutral position. And as we go back, we are targeting the investment in direct services.
Earl, can I add one more?
Yep,
comment?
go ahead.
Just, on these numbers, the guy mentioned that breakdown, so whenever we add a staff, it goes up proportionally between retirement, healthcare, we talked about the CERS rates changing for hazardous duty. One other thing that's on here that's impactful is we just got word last week that the state incentives are increasing for police and firefighters. They're going from $4,000 to $4,300 per individual. So that's included in the budget, but obviously when you include those, the budget impacts what you pay in FICA taxes, what you pay in retirement, you pay them on total gross. So that is also included in that. I think the base increase there was about 40,000. I just want to believe that's part of this increase that's been driven by the state increasing those rates for the hazardous duty positions.
Okay, now these items 3, 4, 5, and 6 on your agenda will kind of blend together, and so we won't necessarily make clear definitive transition. So right now, we're transitioning from staffing more into the proposed budget discussion. So we won't necessarily say item 4 or item 5 per se, we'll transition through. So this is the staffing summary that we've incorporated into the proposed budget. Right now, the next slide we printed for you so you can have a hard copy. We understand the screen's hard to see. This is also will be populated on your OneDrive at the end of the meeting. We'll make sure it's on there. So now, what you see is your cash position for all funds. If you look at page 2 of that sheet at the bottom, is your total fund balance. There's 2 lines. There's darker color blue. That is your top line. If you look at your sheet that you have in front of you, that's this first row. That is your total fund balance for all funds at the end of April, I think. Is that the correct date?
Yes.
Yeah, at the end of April. The line below that is the same period for the fiscal year 21 where you were at last year. Okay, so unrestricted this year is 35.8. Unrestricted last year was 32.9. Okay, restricted last year was 13.6. This year it's 10.9. So a total cash on hand and cash equivalent. Now some of that is debt that you've incurred that you've not spent yet. For example, on the wastewater plant, there's still money that we have as cash that is being paid out over the course of time. Your total cash that you had last year was at the same period was 46.48, and this year it's 46.79. So at the end of the day, over the course of a year, investing in the fire station, investing in all those assets like the wastewater plant, your total cash position has increased by $312,000. All impact included. Okay, so now, the box below that, we'll repeat this, which is we want to take this opportunity to invest in economic vitality things such as the streetscape. And so the slide at the bottom, as of so I'm going to read this column of information. The eligible cash is 29.5, which is unallocated. Below that is a 25% by policy fund balance target, which is $5 million. So that means that you have unrestricted, unreserved equity of 24.46. The annual operating budget, after we include the personnel changes, is 20.2. And so what we would suggest is that if you pull down for the streetscape, the 24.4, if you pull $6.5 million out of that, you're sitting at 18 million, which is almost the equivalent of your annual operating, which is when we roll back in, then your fund balance target. We feel good that you have a year's reserve, which is very strong, which is a very strong cash position for cities our size. Most cities will have in the range of three months, and we have a full 12 after we fund the streetscape.
Earl, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I misspoke earlier when I said it's law, it's not law, it's an internal policy.
That is an internal, yes, sir. Yeah. And we understood what you meant, yeah. So we are in a very good, now you gotta keep in mind that has happened over a 3-year period with COVID, so this is going into the 3rd year of it. And so, again, staff was very conservative. Not just one staff member, all departments will give total credit to the management team for not getting carried away and for maintaining discipline, which is what it takes with a budget our size, maintaining discipline as the 2.5 years have passed. And we have ended up in a stronger cash position because of that. Now we have an opportunity, because of those, the discipline of staff, to fund things like the streetscape in the year we're in. And so we're a strong advocate of that. We appreciate that direction. We think that is a pure economic investment in downtown. It's just like painting your house or renovating your house. It's when you're doing economic development, economic recruitment, you want your town to change from time to time. You want it to be a modern community and have the aesthetics of what folks, the young generation that we need to move here and populate our community to reinforce our workforce demands and to address those needs. We need to do that. We need to liven up our environment. The streetscape project is an effort to do that.
I have 2 questions. In our present budget, I'm sure it allocates for a cemetery sexton.
Yeah, well, so I've got the cemetery budget in here, and I'll show you what the investment is here, and then we'll go through that.
Does the budget include allocation for grant writing?
No, it does not.
Should that be discussed under
Staffing, it didn't come up. I didn't bring it up. I've tried to describe what our position is on that. I don't think that the way our city manager form of government functions, we have professional department heads that are managing their departments. So when you evaluate your internal grant process, one of the things you can have is this idea of trying to do, and Josh called it the what's that word? And he's I lost it. What did I call it, Mike, now?
Let me back up then. Are you going?
But the community liaison can fill that gap over the next couple of years. But there's really, so to fill out a grant, you have to provide a lot of background information and a lot of narrative. Frankly, it is easier for a department head. So you have 3 engineers in the building. Not communities normally don't have that. And so you basically have an internal consulting firm that works for you. We do a lot of work that other communities aren't able to do because of that. some of that is things like grant writing. You had on your agenda Monday 2 grant applications. So when you're looking at those land and water grant applications, for example, Josh, as an individual that worked on those 2 grants, he can populate those grants as quickly as him communicating to a grant writer what should go in those applications. He is putting forth the same man hours to do that for that grant writer than it is to just let him actually do the application. You do not save time by adding that layer. You do not add assets to that layer because you do have professional staff and on all your departments. We are constantly, those staff members are constantly evaluating grants that are eligible in their trades, right? So adding a layer as a grant writer doesn't help administer the city.
So, I requested to have Tad Long come and speak on overall economic development at our next meeting. I don't know if you've got him here, but I'm confident he's going to address that. And, I hear what you're saying, but I still have to take
So
issue with that, because when I go to KLC meetings and I hear other cities talking, and I hear of their success in pulling in funding, when I hear a statement like I did last Friday, that there's more grant money out there than most people ever even dream of. I know what you're gonna say, it depends on what you're gonna use it for.
well, no, I would say this, we've been successful with grants. I mean, we've had multiple grants awarded this year. So the Nicholasville grant application. Frankly, the city of Nicholasville doesn't function like the city of Danville. The city of Danville's internal administrative structure is significantly more robust than Nicholasville's. Nicholasville's is a mayor-commission form of government. So you have, imagine Kevin coming in to administer the departments he's assigned to, the utilities. With all due respect to Commissioner Call, he doesn't know what the market is or what the source of grants are in that industry. We don't have that form of government. In that form of government, for example, in Nicholasville, it is logical that the commission hire a grant writer, which is what you see a lot of other cities doing. So the cities that are mayor-council form of governments, you readily acknowledge that you told me before, I don't know where all these are. Well, so imagine you having to come in to administer all those programs. A grant writer perfectly complements that form of government, right? Whenever the elected officials are tasked with dealing with issues, where we have a professional police chief and fire chief, and our chief's been to the FBI Academy. So we have I'm an engineer. I've been licensed in multiple states and consulted in several. Marshall's the same way. He was administering significant, long-term, billion-dollar programs at the state. So you have training staff that the other communities do not have. So you don't necessarily have to.
I disagree with that.
That's a fact. So when you are looking at the knowledge of what grants to apply for, you don't need that. It's unnecessary. So then, if you have a grant writer and Marshall is going to apply for an EPA grant, he's going to invest the same amount of time communicating to a grant writer to populate this. It's an unnecessary layer of investment. Now, what we have always done is when you need a specific certification or something like an EPA the EPA Economic Development, not EPA, the Economic Development Grant Program, right? So you hire someone that has contacts in Atlanta. Your grant writer's not going to have that. Your grant writer's just going to be a staff person that still has to figure out how to contact Beth Barton in Atlanta. Like, we know her because we've done work down there, but we utilize the grant expert in that industry with that detailed knowledge. So in our case, we utilize Hunter Consulting the most. So Hunter Consulting has a relationship with Atlanta through the Economic Development Cabinet down there. And so we've been successful with economic development grants because we've used strategically expertise to fill that gap. So there is a level of expertise. Our government is more advanced structurally. It's not that we're a more advanced society, but our administrative government, the system that Danville has, is more advanced than some other communities. So remember I talked about you're going from a beginning government entity to some full government like Louisville or Lexington, where it's a merged government, it's a merged system. As population changes, you're somewhere in the middle. Danville's on this end of that side, and some other structures where you're relying on elected officials that aren't trained in as an engineer or as a police chief to administer those departments, you do need more help. That's just demonstrably true.
So, I'm trying to figure out how we can be assured of what you're saying. And my suggestion would be for an upcoming commission meeting, if you would bring in a grant writer and let us hear from a grant writer, whether it's KOC grant writer or somebody.
Well, I think, let me just change that a little. I think this is a function of our HR person to reach out to other HR professionals about the grant writing professional and what that may look like, salary-wise, and what their actual job duties are, and how that may compare to the uptick in the amount of grants that they got. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
No,
I mean, which comes first, chicken the egg? I'd
Well,
like, before Randy gets into that, I guess my sentiment is, I'd like to know from a grant writer, hey, this is how we operate, this is where we add value, this is where we free up staff to do what they do. And if that's not the case, then it's not the case, and I'm convinced. But right now, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm hearing what others are saying, and there needs to be some resolution here so that we can all feel comfortable that we're doing what we should or not doing what we should.
Well,
the point is, we've been asking for this conversation, and we have not really gotten it. That's where I'm frustrated.
Well, I concede that, but practically speaking, the reason it's not gotten a lot of legs is because it goes back to man hours. When you're practically filling out an application for a grant, you have to physically put language to that grant. A grant writer not knowing about a project, not knowing the details of it, the department head, someone has to put that language together. Practically speaking, Josh can put that language together while actually filling out the application more efficiently than trying to both create the language and educate your grant writer, so your grant writer understands the context of the application they're filling out. So in terms of, for us, that's just demonstrably true, having filled out a ton of applications.
Let me give you an example. As I understand it, we missed out on 2 funding rounds on streetscape. Our application got turned down twice. Where I know other communities, particularly ones nearby, got their funding. So why did we sit there and look at our applications and ask somebody, where did we get dinged on this? Where could we have improved so that our score went up?
So we've been successful with CDBG grants and others. What is important is maintaining the relationships at the state level to support your application. Your application, once completed, will look very similar to any other application. So you have to take steps necessary on the backside to fully fund, to be successful, and that comes from the city manager's seat. Ultimately has to do a better job with communicating to Frankfurt, maintaining your relationships with those funding agencies, and highlighting your application so that those folks are aware of it when it gets there. You have to let them know you're filling out an application. That work is what is necessary, and that is the work that we have not done a good job with over the last previously. right? That has nothing to do with what a grant writer's gonna do for you, which is why we suggested the community liaison.
So where I get conflicted is when I have somebody who has done grant writing and they look at our grant application and say, here's where this could have been improved so much to make it more attractive in the scoring of the grant. That's where I get conflicted. That's where I'm sitting there going, doggone it, we're missing dollars. We're missing dollars that we should be getting. And I just simply want to make sure that we as a body are looking at this objectively. Because whatever we can do to get money coming into this community, I'm all about that.
So I remember I sent you some slides with funding from the state into 2 different house districts. In our community, we got 3.9 for transportation infrastructure. Jessamine County got 131 million. That is an entirely different process than what a grant writer would ever embark upon. That is a political, influential
It's an
process,
apple to orange comparison.
but that's the money that folks are, that
Well, and let me tell you-
That's an apple to orange comparison. That's
but
not what I'm talking about.
ultimately, that's what it takes to get streetscape funding. So so if you think about one of the communities that was in that time period you're talking about, that was able to get grant funding, was Jessamine County for streetscape. And so in the same method of effectiveness, what I'm suggesting is our system here locally is less effective currently. So our political system to pursue state funding has to be more effective, not less. And so that's not really supported by a strong grant application, that is supported by relationships.
And you're taking an example that is not applicable to what I'm talking about.
So I'm,
Can I give you an example of that, if that is? So the first example that Nicholasville gave. Yes, sir?
Can I have a chance to speak on this issue?
Let her finish, please.
No, let him go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
She can finish?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
The staff has presented a staffing discussion and recommended new staffing. It appears that the commission is trying to lead us toward an additional staffing recommendation for this fiscal year. And if that's the case, then fine, but I don't think now's the time to be discussing that. So I think, I hear you all saying you want to have a discussion or a meeting about grant writing and its significance, its importance in the city of Danville. None of us want to lose any money. I've never accused staff of missing an opportunity to get new money for it. So my suggestion to move this along is that we ask staff to set us up some kind of workshop, meeting, whatever, on grant writing, its importance and its significance, and KLC, and communities that are organized and that we're organized, and then communities who are not so organized.
I think that's what I asked for earlier.
Okay, well, let's be sure that that's the gist of this discussion, and we move on. I see Mr. Albright sitting there, very patient all morning long, doing the presentation to us, and we've gotten well off our special call meeting. So can I move that we direct staff to set up a workshop about the importance and relevancy, whatever you want to call it, about grant writing and its impact on our community or lack thereof?
It sounds good, but I think there needs to be a timeline.
Well, the reason, yeah, that's the reason we were trying to have this discussion, is because we are in budget and this affects budget.
So how quickly do you think you could get that done, Earl?
we can have some discussion at the next commission
You
meeting.
know, I mean, a full workshop that is thoroughly aired, that this subject is thoroughly aired. You're gonna have to coordinate getting some folks here, et cetera.
I say again to you, the money that you get is directly directly tied, not to your grant application, but to your political capacity and your political cohesion locally.
Not
So-
100%, no,
It
I
is,
disagree.
there is a lot of,
We have a fundamental disagreement, and I'm gonna go back to what Commissioner Atkins has suggested, and I agree.
Yeah.
Get a number of different folks in here that can address this and give us assurance that we are on the right path here. That's all we're asking.
yeah, no, I hear you.
Let me add something else to this discussion too. it's very obvious that the mayor and Commissioner Terry has some experiences that the rest of us don't have, and I would suggest that because we're in the midst of this budget process, that you two suggest to our city manager some people that you feel would be able to come and help pass some of this up. I'm sure Earl has some folks in mind, but if it's gonna move along quickly, let's don't put all the burden on staff. This is one of our concerns, so let's help staff move it to the next level.
Well, I mean,
I've already done
I would like to see if we could add Thursday, next Thursday, but I need to speak with Tad, for example. He's who you want to hear from, I
Well,
know.
that's one entity.
Right,
I'd
well-
like for Tad to say who else in the state is good at this.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt our feelings at all to bring Tad down. I mean, that's totally normal. And so it just depends on if he has time to do it then.
And I think KLC has somebody that is a on-staff parent writer. I'd like to hear from them.
Right. And so what we do to that end, we do lean, you lean into the ad for certain grants. You lean into other organizations rather than having some of those positions. Is all we're saying. But yeah, we'll get into that.
That'd be a third entity.
Well, and can I just give you a real quick example, which is what I was gonna do a few minutes ago? The first thing that the HR person explained to me in Nicholsville was this administrator had some experience with grant writing, first of all, so he came in and hit the ground running. The other thing is continued administration of the grants, which really is what takes up a lot of time. But the first example she gave me was that this is a community grant writing position. The first thing that they did was they partnered with the library and got a grant to provide hotspots for students that didn't have internet access. They have those hotspots available at the library and at City Hall for checkout to those students. Those are the kinds of things that we are missing out on, I think.
I'll give you another one I just thought of and learned it Friday. There's some serious grant money out there from the federal level for the final mile. We've danced around that for 3, 4, 5 years. We didn't know what the final mile was. We didn't know what kind of applications, funding. And so the net result was that don't anybody spend any money locally when you've got access to these federal dollars. And they're significant. So that's the kind of thing that I want us all to feel comfortable about. That we're pursuing government dollars for our benefit.
Right, and broadband, we went through Guthrie's office and we've gone through McConnell's office, and McConnell's plugged us into the appropriate staff person administering that actual program. And so we are continuing to investigate that with the representative person tied to the program at the federal level.
So maybe somehow we need to keep a running list of what are we pursuing, what's the progress on that, and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I'm
and
not trying to add work, I'm just trying to keep our eye on the ball of monies that are available out there if we can get them.
yeah, your fear is also, staff does a lot of work towards things like that, and that the commission just doesn't, because of our form of government, because we do have professionals out that you all never see. For example, the broadband question and the various projects that we submitted to Guthrie's office and things like that. You all don't always see those, and we understand that. Having that knowledge, would make more sense on probably what I'm saying for you, but we hear you. We'll try to figure something out.
And I've got the name of that guy that does the Kentucky Wire, and I need to get that to you, because that would be helpful to this commission.
Yeah, that's an interesting presentation. We've sat through that one time, and it's hard infrastructure that's had state investment, and it's a lot. So we've got to figure out the next steps.
Okay, moving right along.
Okay.
To the next item.
Yep. So this is the summary for the general fund. Today, after we've had incorporated all of those staff into it that we talked about before, the bottom line revenue resources that we are at are $21,222,000. $891. The base operating expenses for the city departments is $16,090,000. There's a gap there that is consumed by non-departmental. This number on your sheet is $8,900,000. That includes fully drawing down the and investing in the streetscape. So we programmed that number into it. The only variation is on what we would consider a final budget is this number that's in white, which is your capital number. I don't have that. It's going to be a little bit less than this number. That's simply a repeat of last year. It's going to be less than this a little bit at that line item, we think.
Can you read that number, please?
That number is $5,011,000. However, like I said, that's not a polished number. We've got some information on capital to come for you, and you'll see what we're weighing out. But from an operational perspective, our core operating expenses are about $20,200,000, and that includes debt service, for example. And then the community agency line is, you can see, if I can get this red line to come out, right at the bottom of that is a $144,000 number that I've added into community agencies. We'll have that conversation here in a second. And so when you take the streetscape out, and then you add up what your core operating expenses are in this proposed budget, you're $20,200,000. You're against a revenue of $21,222,000. So we're still in a good financial position to consider how our costs are indicated to change next year with what we're looking at. So then, if you want to look at any given department, you can. What we'll do is skip forward to page 14 of 49. That is your municipal aid summary. We have suggested to pull down there with some of the street work Josh has talked about, like for example, Church Street, pull down that fund reserve a little bit. What we projected is ending the year with a reserve of about $519,000. The next sheet is identifies what the detail of the municipal aid is. You're looking at about $370,000 in revenue in the blue column against expenses of about $895,000, but that includes $620,000 worth of heavy roadway development, meaning construction or renovation, things like, again, Church Street is the easy thing to point to. It includes $250,000 in paving estimate.
Does the gas prices affect that at all?
Not yet. It's the formula, but it shouldn't, not yet.
That'll come mostly through the state though, right?
That is correct.
And at some point, it dribbles down to us.
So then we have a couple smaller funds. We'll jump through those. The police safety fund is, has a little bit of carry forward. It's a very small fund. It's got about $26,800 in total money available for spending against an appropriation of about $17,000. That's your overtime for your police on roadside safety. The next sheet is the detail sheet of that, and you can see that goes to highway safety of about $12,000 in expenses on that sheet.
Is that, are these funds available to the city to use as with discretion, or do we have to go through?
That's basically highway safety money.
That's go through DOT to get that? The answer is yes.
Yes. I was trying, we don't have another layer of approval, that's just that's our staff time, right, yeah. Right. So then the next fund is your drug forfeiture fund, that's in and out. We've estimated an in of 5,000 and an out of 5,000. The fund balance should be about 11,000 by the end of the year, and therefore we are maintaining that level.
This is money that we can use to spend, correct?
That is money used in drug interdiction type work for the police department, investigations, et cetera. The next slide is streetscape. Again, that we have programmed the revenue from the general fund into this fund, from the general fund reserves into this fund, draw down as an expenditure as a capital construction project. Pretty straightforward there. We get into parks a little bit next. We'll talk about that for a second. That is on page 21. Is the summary. We have what you'll notice on that summary is the significant capital investment of your Parks Master Plan that was previously programmed. I do want to spend some time with this and capital to make sure we've got the correct numbers where we want there. But the cells above that, which is your detail sheets behind it, is Millennium Park. We're expecting that budget to be about $814,000 next year. The fitness center is a cost of $404,000. The pool is a cost of $68,000. We're looking at spending about $48,000 in community parks, and the rest is capital. Total expenditure of parks of $8,800,000 against a baseline revenue between the city, the county, and operational revenue of $976,000.
Before I forget it, the question is coming to me, when is the pool opening?
Should be open next week. We normally open the pool after Memorial Day.
As we increase our spending, in the parks, are we able to, get some sharing in that from our brethren in the county?
So, yes, their contract will go up 7% this year because of the COLA. So their allocation goes from $329,000 to $344,000. So it inches up a little bit, 340 some thousand, whatever that final number is. It goes up 7%. But going forward, as you expand into the fairgrounds and whatnot, that is a conversation that's coming. We know that the county has a desire to locate EMS. We've talked about the area immediately to the north of that property next to the animal shelter there being a good location for a future fire station EMS facility. That conversation is ongoing, and so we expect to hear more back from that over time. We do believe that with other assets, Constitution Square is a property that is a park. Should that be rolled into the other parks operation? Probably so. And so we would ask them then therefore to consider that. And so that's a conversation that will continue to happen.
What do you think that conversation, we put a timeline on that conversation?
We will have a follow-up meeting with that hopefully next week. We have met with our consultant a couple times since the original discussion started, and we wanted to do it this week. We just couldn't make that happen with all the other things going on, and so we are looking at that meeting forthcoming.
What's the reason for the fitness center budget more than doubling since 2021?
So we didn't have, so when you look at this parks budget, this is the beginning of time for us. We really didn't have good information back here as far as what costs what. So as we go forward, this starts to narrow in on actual numbers. So this was the first year that we actually had city detailed information, right? But then COVID hit.
That's when I changed the structure.
That's when we changed the structure. So right now, you really don't have any good information on parks. Because, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think over this next year, you're gonna have a much better, this coming year, a much better understanding of what we are spending in parks, not including the capital, actual operating, and getting those items, organized in a way that meshes with our budgeting system. They operate in a very different way, than we do.
Thanks
So-
for your work, Steve.
Okay.
Your work this side.
So then without going into those individually, going into the next one is the cemetery. Mary, this next, go to slide 27, or sheet 27. Yep. This is your cemetery summary. We'll point you to the blue column, which is the far right. The city is investing $180,000 in operating the cemetery this year.
What's in that number?
This is a transfer from the general fund.
Right.
Okay, the expenses I'll show you down here below.
Okay.
Okay. Service revenue will be about $122,000 for a total revenue, counting the city's direct contribution, which is your fourth number is $302,000. You have a fund balance that we've been setting aside for capital construction of $695,000. So when we add the transfer this year and the revenue this year to that, you have $997,000 in the cemetery fund allocated for work. Operationally, the personnel costs, when we begin there, which is your top 4 rows, you're looking at a cost. The next row is capital, which is the investment that you're going to put into, I keep trying to, that camera's throwing my little laser pointer off. Okay, right there we go. So this fifth number, what we're talking about this fiscal year is investing $425,000 in the facilities at the cemeteries for a total expenditure, when you're talking about operating and that capital investment of $723,000 in the cemetery this year, which is following up on the budget last year as we're getting into using those capital dollars. We're adding some capital dollars to that. And so that you pull down that fund balance from $700,000 down to $273,000 at the end of the fiscal year. I think we are in a position now to be able to say we'll be able to get to those burial communal shelters and the things that have been previously identified. And so we are, to Mayor, your point, you were asking me, are we investing properly in the cemetery? We're suggesting to you that in the fiscal year we're going into, we are. And so then going forward, if you want to have the follow-up conversation again next year, or that in terms of operating revenue, operating expenses, adding those details, I think currently you don't necessarily have to do that to improve your environment out there. I think investing in the capital, your landscaping, your hardscape is really where it's at for right
We
now.
have a breakout of 425 going to the table.
I have that. It's, currently, it looks like we have the Hilldale Communal Shelter, the Bellevue Communal Shelter, general upgrades to all of them, and a cemetery database. So the database, I can allocate those numbers out for that 425 if you want me to. Those are the 4 big items.
I have that slide towards the end.
So while you're looking at that, does this include a cemetery section for both cemeteries?
Not for both cemeteries, we only have one cemetery section.
Would do that cover both?
They do cover both cemeteries. Yes, I misunderstood that.
So have we hired that person?
Yes, we have a cemetery section on staff.
We just did that not long.
Yes, about a year.
But we also eliminated one person in the cemetery.
No, we've not eliminated the position out of the cemetery. We have cemetery sexton, support staff, and then their effort is augmented with public works and also your maintenance contract.
We don't have an assistant sexton per se.
Not by title, but we do have a position with him.
I'll get it with you.
The capital discussion, Mayor, that number's broken out in a forthcoming slide. I'm not gonna skip all the way to the end, but I'll hold that conversation, we'll focus on that when we get there.
That's fine.
The next is the Stormwater Fund on page 30. Same thing here, we want to pull down the reserve that has been stockpiled over the last couple of years. We are projecting an $815,000 investment on this line for capital construction. That includes 2 watersheds, and Josh isn't in here, I'll let him describe that as he brings those forward to you as we get into the execution of those. I know one of them is on the north side of the Streamland watershed, that's been on hold for a couple of years because of the whole impact, I guess you could say, so that money's still sitting there, and now we're ready to go on those. We've completed the engineering study and plans on that watershed. I know he's got another watershed, I think it's the watershed east of Lexington Avenue, from what I remember, the Indian Hills area, from what I recall. But I'm not gonna, if he changes that, don't hold me accountable for that, if you don't know. So stormwater, the total revenue on stormwater is $600,000 this year. And the total operating expenses is about $550. But again, with capital, you're looking at $815,000. Going forward to the garbage fund.
Can I interrupt for a second? How much longer are we talking about? I mean, I don't wanna rush you, but I'm gonna need to take my second time out.
Let's take a time out, because we're transitioning into garbage, and we can talk about that for a while,
I
probably.
appreciate it very much.
Garbage is sheet 33.
So essentially, Earl, you can schedule breaks based on when they
I told Wilma, I said, I saw Wilma go in the court.
Continue on, Mr. City Manager.
Thanks, sir. Garbage, is on the screen. The far right is, what we have, been able to do with I give Josh credit, is with the new contract, what we've done is we've actually, this year, we are estimated that we do not have to do an operational transfer from the general fund. So the next to last column is, this thing would love to not work for me. That drives me insane. So the next to last column, the estimated year end, we think we can balance the fund without having to do an operational transfer from the general fund. That's good. Next year, you're looking at a contract cost of 1.25, the contract cost of roughly 1.3 million, versus, right now projected revenue of 1.25, which will zero out and pull down that reserve a little bit too, that stockpile there.
Is this what we pay the county from for the
The,
centers and all that?
so no, you don't have to pay that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna propose, so 2 years ago when we pulled out of that relationship with the county, that was probably not the best thing, and I personally would not have recommended that. I think the city manager kind of misunderstood what the relationship was with the county. The state designates a countywide solid waste coordinator and designates that responsibility or KRS to the county. And so what we want to do is lean into that. So there's some things the city does good, some things the county does good because it's statutorily allocated or designated to them. So what we want to do is participate with them in a partnership. We're working on an MOU with them in order to do that again, and allow them to participate with us inside of the city more, in a more robust way.
More like it used to be?
More like it used to be, yes.
Good.
Is there a possibility of the coordinator negotiating the contract countywide instead of this being separate?
Well, yes, what we've already talked about, we've met with Ken Judge and the solid waste coordinator, Andy. We've talked about that a little bit. What we want to investigate is everything from one countywide franchise. I would not be an advocate of the city and county collecting a franchise fee, but we could have a franchise so that we can have one solid waste coordinator. What we do think, or solid waste contract, we do think that will help some residents in the county get better service. We do think it will lower their costs, piggybacking onto the city volume. At the same time, our goal for the city would be stabilize our costs, but improve our service by having a single entity responsible throughout the entire network. And so we are investigating those opportunities, and we will lean into the county's strengths in order to do that if that's the best thing for the city.
Thank you.
Yeah. Slide 35 or sheet 35 is 2 pages later. That is the utility fund summary. We would reiterate that the utility is a break-even enterprise. It's not designated to generate a bunch of revenue over expenses. We try to mitigate our rates and improve our economic footing by having manageable and as low of utility rates as we can. We are positioned very strong in the region from a rate perspective. In the ag, we're still the fifth, I want to say fifth lowest on an average customer in city. And so we're still in a very strong position with our utility rates, even though locally they have gone up a little bit. We freely acknowledge that. The revenue from the basic operating fund is about $11,172,000. We are projecting an appropriation, a base operating appropriation without capital of $11,166,000. Capital discussions we will have and will continue to have after today's meeting, but we'll have a little bit more here in a minute on that. So we are projecting essentially a break-even utility fund budget, which, the important thing there for us is it includes phase 2 on compensation. Would like to point out though, our rates adjust based on the Department of Local Government's published COLA every year. This year, instead of being a 1 and 1.5% number, it's 7%. We need to communicate that effectively. That is directly tied to the inflation rate. Our base utility rate will go up 7%, but a lot of other communities do too, built in. That's the utility fund. If you want to talk about that we can. If you have any questions on those individual departments, we can do that too. The big problem when we go through the utility fund, remember that I don't have capital on that sheet yet, but to just talk about that briefly, we have phase 1 of the wastewater plant underway, and we have the sewer infrastructure on Clark's Run being upgraded to serve the industrial region of the community. Those are 2 significant projects. Phase 2 of the wastewater plant is not funded, and it is not necessarily positioned to advertise or construct. You're going to be in phase 1 until next spring, and so really the heavy lifting on the wastewater plant will occur next year in terms of financial discussion. Meanwhile, we will have to remember how time played out. As we were doing the sewer line on Lebanon Road, that was about a $9 million investment. The wastewater plant phase 1 is about a $10 million, what originally was about a $10 million investment. We applied for, or because of the schedule produced by Meggitt, we had to speed up Lebanon Road, and then when COVID hit, that stopped, that stalled out. We had already acquired the money for that project, and so then as we went ahead and was able to start the wastewater plant project, and so we've used that money for the wastewater plant project, which means there's a gap in financing for both the as-bid phase 1 at the wastewater plant, which is about 13, so you have a $3 million shortfall there, and then you have the funds necessary for the Lebanon Road corridor, which right now is still estimated to be about $9 million. So we have that combination that we will have to debt service, and I know Lee, you want to talk about that, but we have been working on that with our consultant for that, which is Compass Financials. We've been talking about that, and all of those discussions is forthcoming. We're going to come back to you with more information on funding those 2 projects and getting a situation where we have a clear path forward with how those are going to be funded, whether it be bond, CAD money, whatever that ends up being. Okay. If you have any questions, you're welcome to call me on that. Museum fund is next. That is page 46. That's one of those small funds. The revenue for that is a base operating transfer from the general fund, and that is for some of the expenses that are incurred at the community arts building, for example, such as the electrical service and things like that. The next one is the parking fund. Which with the streetscape may not play out exactly from an expense perspective or revenue perspective the way it always has, although this budget is based on the way it always has, which is about $550,000 in revenue, including a $285,000 commitment from the general fund to support that department, and then expenditures of $597,000. That includes the $200,000 investment in the elevator column where we have water that gets in on the elevator. So we're talking about spending $200,000 there directly. All right, so then that's your basic slides. Now we've got community allocations next. I'm going to skip through that and get into this capital sheet for just a second. and you all can't see that either. So do this for me, because we want to follow up on this, so this will be in your OneDrive. We will email this sheet and this sheet out directly to you so that you can look at this. This has in it the equipment that each department is looking for. This is the summary of all things capital, both operating capital like equipment and also some of your project expenses like streetscape. So all of those are on those sheets broken out by department so that you'll know exactly what's in each one, okay? So we won't necessarily try to dive too deep into that today because the whole TV and everything that's gone on here, that's a little bit confusing, we know that's hard to see. So we'll make sure you get a copy of that, and then we will have that discussion next Thursday in more depth. Okay? Let's do that. Coming back to community agencies now. So we've got this sheet in front of you on your desk. And we need your all's input on how to populate that. What is in the draft budget you have in front of you is what I've taken liberty with, is this far right column. This is what we've got into the budget today. Now, we need you all to confirm what you all want filled out in this column for each one of these agencies. We have taken your average, your min and max, and also looked at what a majority of the commissioners had allocated to arrive at this last column, which is what we suggest based on your average, your min, your max, and also what the majority of the commission has looked at on your sheets that you've given back to Ashley. Okay, city clerk. So, where I'm beginning at the top, let's see. How do y'all want to approach this? Let's ask you all that. How do you want to have the conversation about community? Now, at the bottom is your shared agencies, which is your airport board, your economic development allocation. Now, that is labeled as EDP, but I'm labeling that as economic development allocation, right? And so you all can decide how you want that distributed. And then planning and zoning is at the bottom. So, where do y'all want to start? Or do you want to start? Y'all just want to quit?
We have a presentation from the airport board.
So the airport board, let's talk about the airport board. I put in your sheet there, or on your table, a letter that I can talk from. This is one page out of their application that I think helps clarify a lot of what their comments are. Let me move my computer down here so I can keep track of it a little bit better. I want to open this spreadsheet up so I can track it if it pops up. There it goes. All right. So the airport, on that letter, so what they've asked for is $100,000 allocation plus or minus a few dollars. It's a total of like $101,972.50. So what the airport is suggesting to you is they have they have a grant that they've been allocated that needs a local match. They are asking the city contribute $26,972.50 towards that local match. They are asking the county to do the same. Then that match is to receive a total grant and state funding of $1,078,000. That is for a new apron and connecting taxiway project that they have slated for their efforts this fiscal year. Then, in addition to that $26,972, if you look at the paragraph that says the remaining funds on that letter that we laid on your desk, the remaining funds of $75,000, will be placed in the master plan reserve. So what they're asking for is, so out of their $100,000 allocation, they're asking for a total of $75,000 that they can have for beginning of the master plan project for them. I went to their airport board meeting last week. They are anticipating a full master plan project to cost for them about $500,000. And so what they're anticipating is asking for 75 from the city this year and 75 next year towards that effort. So that the city's contribution towards that master plan would be about $150,000. Go ahead, Tom.
When will be the timing of the initiation of that plan?
What they want to do, and what we've suggested to them is, because the nature of the cash flow for a project like that, not to stockpile $400,000 and then start. $75,000 wouldn't be spent necessarily in month one. So what we would suggest they do is just simply start their process. If you all want to allocate the $75,000, they should start their project, and they'll probably spend a third of that this fiscal year, I would suggest. So out of the $500,000, they'll probably get about 30% done in the fiscal year we're in, which is, so our match would properly allow them, if you allocate that match, we would ask they not hold it in reserve, we would ask they go ahead and start their project, which they indicated that that's the direction they want to go. And so then you wouldn't be putting that money in reserve, you would be allocating that as they submitted invoices against it.
So if I heard Mark Gover correctly, last month's meeting, those engineering firms require 90% upfront.
I've not heard that. Most of those firms go, you bill monthly, you invoice monthly. I've not heard, you're not paying somebody
Might check up on that.
I would advise them not to contract with a firm that wants that money.
Well, again, might check up on that because according to Bart, that's standard operating procedure.
That's not the consulting world I work in. I'm not arguing with you, that's just stunning to me that a firm would ask for 90% of
Seems
$500,000.
strange to me, but I don't want to hold it up.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I hear you. So going back to this table, on the airport, so these numbers over on the far right, under the suggested column, what I've talked about over here is two numbers. I've got 14,000, and then I've got $76,972, and here's what is in those two numbers. You'll notice I have operating over here on the right, and then grant match and capital master plan contribution is the line below that. So operationally, we have always incurred their insurance expense on the cities, through the city's insurance program. What we would suggest is you allocate up to that insurance commitment directly to them and let them contract with that insurance service directly. Now, they may use the same vendor, KLC's insurance program, but they would incur that policy as a direct expense. I'm asking you to include that in the budget as a direct allocation for that, to offset that expense for them. You've done it internally before, this is just given to them to do, basically. Then what we are suggesting is an investment of about $5,000 for them to improve their courtesy car. Currently, they have a very old car that was donated to them years and years ago. What we would like them to do is consider leasing from the fleet, from the enterprise program, a new vehicle that then could be treated like a regular rental car. It would be a leased vehicle that would turn over every couple of years as wear and tear impacted the quality of that vehicle. So for us, that courtesy car is a critical piece of, it's an economic tool, truthfully. So when you have someone that flies in, having a nice car for them to drive is really important. Believe it or not, I know in private practice, I've used that before, and that courtesy car is really an important tool. So we would like to use this opportunity to encourage them to get a new courtesy car. And we would like to directly give them that money to do that acquisition they currently don't have that in their operating budget.
So those two things are the 14,000?
Those two things are the 14,000. So what I'd like to add, so move the insurance costs from the city's operating budget to the airport operating budget, and to add to their operating budget a rental car. A leased enterprise car.
But on the insurance, we're still incurring that.
Exactly, we're incurring that with this transfer.
So I'll make sure that that's understood. The city is, and has been paying for that insurance cost for a number of years.
That is correct. Now, once you get beyond that, what I'm asking you to do is to fund the $26,972.50 for this taxiway project, which is in progress for them. That is, that will leverage about $1 million in infrastructure investment. So the second row over here on the right, which is the $76,000 number, I keep hitting the microphone on that, it's the perfect elevation, I'm sorry. This number over here is about $76,000 over here on the right. So what we would suggest is the 26 is the match, and let's set aside 50 for the master plan, and then understanding if they get to a point where, and they are actively working on that master plan, we may have to add to that as the budget goes on. But I would ask the commission to be open-minded and be willing to do that.
So 14,000 plus 26,972.50 plus 50.
Correct. Yeah.
That is 90,972.
That is correct.
What is the total,
$90,972.50.
Yes.
But 50 of that we would hold until there is progress on that.
I would suggest letting them incur that expense and then seeking that reimbursement. If they're gonna hold it in reserve, we can just hold it in reserve here.
Right.
Right. I mean, there's no point in making that transfer until they get that expense incurred.
And this is not towards operational costs.
No, neither, the $76,000 number has nothing to do with operations. Right. Now, in terms of economic development allocation, what we have programmed in is a $150,000 investment. How you want to break that up, I would suggest, we know that there's some idea that we need to put some money aside for the EDA. Then what we learned last week is that the EEP is going to reform into something different, which we saw that presentation last week. So you all voted last week to have that new entity incur the expense of the employees. That was in the presentation last week. To bring your memory back, Mayor, when you're
I got you.
yeah, okay. And so, I would suggest, let's seeing how that, for the budget we're going into, let's put $150,000 in for economic development. Let's not allocate that further until you get your, development corporation form, until those revisions are confirmed that are consistent with what you all voted on, right? Let's hold that money, as far as what it goes to what. I think just sit on that, allocate the money, because we know that we have discussed for some time increasing that contribution. It goes up 50,000 from 100, so let's settle on that spot, and that's what, I don't know if that makes sense. I'm starting to stutter.
As a number, do we need to put that up to 200,000 since that is what the county is budgeted for?
So I wrote this number down before I do that, and so if you want to increase this number to 200, I think you can do that. I think the operating expenses versus revenue have demonstrated you do have that wiggle room. So if you want us to pencil that in at 200, we can do that.
I think they're trying to be good partners and we want to match it.
Okay.
That's not good.
But I'm sorry. But you're saying 200,000 with the intent we're gonna do some EDP and some EDA.
I think, yeah, well, it won't be EDP, it will be whatever that development
Oh, I'm
corporation.
sorry, yeah.
Yes,
So we got a new name, yeah.
correct.
But that, is that your intention, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, and like you just suggested, we still have to have a conversation as to the allocation of that amount.
Right.
So.
So we'll match the county.
200 plus the 150?
No, we will add 200,000 to that line item. So in this column, the blank column, the second column is what we're filling in now. And down there where it says economic development allocation, we will type in 200,000. So that's how much you will have in your budget to decide on later. Yeah, so now, right here where this is,
Yeah, I think we have.
right there, that will be $200,000 in that line, that cell.
But I thought the EDA is according to the interlocal agreement we have out, that is different from what we're looking at here.
That's the conversation we need to have.
Yeah, I think it is.
What, say it again.
The EDA is it an interlocal agreement, is it a memorandum?
Yes, you have an ordinance in there,
It's an
interlocal
ordinance.
agreement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that is completely outside of what we're talking about right here.
No, I'm talking about your total commitment to your economic development allocation of $200,000. It's the same as the county's making. How you made
The
them,
EDA.
so no, that's not what you voted on last week. You voted on last week to get behind the effort of the Development Corporation, which also included the staff last week. That's what you voted on last week.
The words in the ordinance of the EDA
Do not conflict with that.
is to fund equally.
Yeah, well, yeah, so that's, I get you now, you were
Which is
diving into that.
different from what we're talking about on this
So-
piece of paper.
So if the county strictly funds the EDA at 200,000, then that's a different conversation. So we'll have to have that conversation. So as it relates to economic development, I would suggest continuing with the $200,000 and continuing the conversation of the Development Corporation, which Dr. Roush, and getting an email from him yesterday, we know he is intending to follow up and do the meeting that we talked about here last week, so that he communicates to the Industrial Foundation, communicates with the county, and so that we have some sort of joint meeting and continuing that so that everybody gets on the same page and the investment is as intended.
I think this, what we're saying right now to anybody that's up there, is that our intent is to take the 200,000 and decide some way to split it up, share it with both groups.
Right. And understanding that the city and county have agreed to fund the EDA jointly, equally, that's a conversation inside of that 200,000.
And the county is still in the budgetary process, so that 200,000 could change if we give it up for the similar.
Correct.
Correct. It gets us a start.
Yeah. So then the next line below that is planning and zoning. And so we are penciling in their full allotment of 75,000. That seemed to be the prevailing nature of the commission too. And so then this total here goes from 276,000 to 365,000, which includes an inflation of expenses on the economic development allocation, and a variation a little bit from the 101,000 that the airport board asked for, down to roughly 90,000, which still accommodates what they want. And we acknowledge that that will be an ongoing project going forward for a little bit.
So did everybody here want to give that much to the airport? Are we deciding on that now?
We came up with the 90,972.50.
I think that's a little high, but that's just me,
Well,
but
but it's-
everybody else is okay.
It's specific to projects.
Yeah, well, I
And
didn't vote for the annex, I didn't want to put too much. So, but I wanted to do some, for the 26 and the 14, but I just was seeing if everybody was on the same page, so. If you are, that's fine.
I understand your question, I'm sorry.
Well, I wasn't gonna give that much, the 90, it was a little high, so. But if everybody was on that page.
Separate from the annexation, the idea of them doing a master plan has been an ongoing issue for a number of years. Their existing master plan is 1989 to 91 era. And so, the discussion about that really has nothing to do with any other external discussion about annexation or anything different. There is a need to do the master plan, they are acknowledging that, and they're asking the city to contribute some money towards that. That would happen in this process, and it's certainly something we would recommend you follow through with, just like you do a master plan for your wastewater system. The airport, again, as stated during the annexation discussion, that's your biggest single piece of public infrastructure in this community. It's that property value is probably in the neighborhood of $50 to $80 million at the minimum. And so doing a master plan for it, not having done one for so long, is very important. Now, that master plan is very expensive because there are so many FAA requirements tied to it. It will be multi-step. There's an economic development component to it. There's an external security access issue to it, and then there's internal how the airport operates compliant with FAA regulations to it also. So that is not a simple master plan like you would facilities for the city.
Well, the master plan is economic development, because you can't recruit businesses if there's not a master plan, they just won't come.
Do we know if the county's putting anything in on this too?
We will follow up with them. We would encourage the city to take the lead if the county has not, and to reinforce the need for the airport master plan, and let's use that as an opportunity to go ask the county to make an equal contribution.
All sounds good to me. I like what we've done with the airport board, we've given them the 2690. We've covered the insurance, we've stressed the importance of the courtesy car, and we're putting $50,000 into the master plan to start. Pretty good.
So now, the rest of it is this above the line. So you've got a couple different options. This total over here is, you can look at that. That, like I said, that's my interpretation of your all's information. That totals $144,800. Last year's allocation was roughly $136,000, so it goes up $8,000. But the requested amount was $185,000, so it doesn't give anybody, or it does give some the full amount, but it doesn't give the system the full amount that was requested. And so we can handle that how you want to go one at a time. What do y'all want to do?
I just think if there's one somebody wants to talk about, fire away.
Yeah, Kendall and Friends Foundation, refresh your copy that is. That's a new one.
That-
Kendall and Friends.
They made the presentation for the special needs field on the north end. That is somewhere down the road, we would love to, they're going to make a community accessible facility there. So there's some credibility in making a contribution to them. We would like though to partner with them if the city is going to invest in resources at Jenny Rogers, for example, of an all-purpose field, then, it seems like there's still a partnership there with them that we can save their capital investment in the future.
I agree with you, I just didn't remember who they were this one, so put it in here.
I'm just gonna continue to stand by the fact that I do not believe taxpayer dollars should go to salaries and operational expenses on these allocations. While all of these are very worthy, I think that the taxpayer money should go towards specific projects and/or programs.
From a budget standpoint of view, Earl, how could we facilitate that?
Well, as part of their compliance with our application, they're committing to that end. For example, West T Hill Theater, that's an advertising allotment. Basically, you're marketing, you're investing in the marketing of that facility with that $400. That's not paying, that's not paying a salary. Some of the others, it's a physical investment of material, where other than the Boyle County Senior Citizen Center, that is an allocation towards feeding towards their programs. So each program, you're not funding their staff, you're funding the implementation of their various programs, right? And so most of that can be confirmed with their request for reimbursements or their request for administration of their allotment. We hear that, and we can, if that is if you want us to totally verify that every time, we'll figure out a way to administer that.
The proposal, if we reject it, because they identify and list what they're going to use the money for.
Correct.
And once they get it, it's a trust factor, correct?
So for example, on the application, they've all committed to where that money's going to, which is why I say that about, like West T Hill. That allocation, that $400 is for marketing, for example, or whatever that is in their original application. None of them are building their system off of that, their internal operation system off of those allotments.
So do they, does the city just automatically send out a check, or, and I'm talking about significant money here, not $400.
Well, the most
Do
significant.
they have to show the progress? Do you know what I'm asking? Do they have to come and say, hey, we are ready for this, or
So
do
the
we just
funding
send a check?
agreement, the funding agreement that they sign once you all allocate their funds, there's a clause in there that they have to provide financial statements. Over a certain amount, if they receive a certain amount of money from us, they have to provide monthly financial statements to us.
Monthly, and what's the amount that they
I
have?
have to look at the contract, I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's,
10,000?
I wanna say it's.
So when we have a contract, or when we have a contract with a contractor, they submit a request for disbursement based on submitted bills and expenses, correct? I would like to suggest that we operate much the same way. If there is you want to take West T Hill, for example, you mentioned it was going to be used for advertising. Then submit a bill for reimbursement, or submit a bill that the city writes a check to the board for that payment.
Yeah, they need to submit an invoice with backup information on some of those. We can do that. Now, let's talk about this too for just a second. Philosophical. Years ago, the community agency allocation was significantly more than what it is now. Correct. Right. So you have peeled out a lot of expenses out of that could be construed as not accomplishing what you're suggesting as your mission. When you say we want to know we don't want to pay for salaries, for example. A lot of those contributions have been peeled out of this allocation. Fundamentally, the way our system is set up is that local governments don't do welfare, right? That is done through private agencies, through churches, through private, so for example, the New Hope Food Pantry. You don't run a program directly out of City Hall to help feed the needs, right? And so what you're really doing is, this is the administration through those private agencies. This is contribution of those welfare needs. Systematically, that is the way our government is set up, not just in Danville, but throughout the country, really. We as a society, the United States is really highly dependent on private civic organizations providing some of those services, some of that direct touch services. And so long as when you look at that list and you philosophically agree that those agencies are providing a service you believe that is needed in our community, such as the New Hope Food Pantry. So if that is the single point of, that the churches has rallied behind to put their resources behind to provide that benefit, if you believe that that is the appropriate program to fund, then there's, I would argue that you're not giving money away, you are contributing to the welfare of your community. Now, 25 years ago, it could be construed as it was not that way. There was maybe more fat in that program. I would suggest at $144,000, there's not a lot of fat in there. That is your contribution towards the various entities providing unique, such as Bull County ASAP or Bull County Mercer County Helping Hands, CASA, Central Latino of Danville was a group last year, the Civil Air Patrol, Family Services. So there's a couple of those agencies, such as the Brass Band and the Heart. Those are the only two that are really not tied directly to a welfare of that service that is going out into your community. So for me, I don't look at that list as a people begging the city for money. That is the programs that the city is highlighting that we want to improve the welfare service outwardly into the community, such as with, Central, or the New Hope, or the nursing home ombudsman. So Shepherd's House, same thing. That's an investment of a welfare program out into the community, right? Now, yes, you do have the West T Hill Theater, you do have Pioneer Playhouse, you do have Heart of Danville and Brass Band in there. Outside of that, it's difficult to look at that list and say that you're tossing money around. Again, your total investment's $144,000. So and 66 of it is going to one entity, right? So you're really only tossing around amongst 22 or 20 other entities about $75,000 to $80,000. That's not a waste of money. That is a $70,000 to $80,000 program towards the improved welfare of needs in your community, unmet needs through other agencies, right? So I think, please look at it like that. I think that's appropriate.
And I want to say that's very well stated. I want to thank you all for the information that you shared with us this morning. The hour is almost 12 o'clock noon, and I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Mayor, to adjourn this meeting.
We have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
A motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Oh.
We're just going with it?
Commissioner Atkins, may I offer a closing comment first?
Well,
Well, get on the record. I wanna ask everybody to, say the prayers for the fine folks down in Texas, for the parents of those children. I cannot even begin to imagine. We live in a different world, and we have to approach it differently. And, at this point, all we can do is pray, unless there's specific needs. And if there are, Mr. City Manager, if you hear any, let us know.
I pulled out a book yesterday called Lifetimes. It's a children's book. Been reading it myself, read it several elementary age kids yesterday. So if anybody out there wants to order a copy of that book, feel free to give them a list.
What's it about?
It's about life cycles, and everything is a life cycle. Very elementary, but it talks about living and dying. I want to use it twice in my 47-year career from the situation of a child to
Everyone have a good day.